the flashing lights through the room looks like, which I appreciate. If you're new with us, welcome to Powell Church. I appreciate you guys look like you came for an awesome party, and now the part where you've got to just sit and be quiet for 20 minutes in your flash. Yes, yeah, in the flashing lights. The last time I was on the stage a few days ago was our childcare Christmas program, and this year I usually do the opening prayer, but this year they had an even younger class, and they were all spread out on the stage because we didn't want to try to bring them in when the thing started. We want to have them already up here, when it started. So when I got up here and looked out, it was just all these people waving, that were waving at their kids. And then, because my daughter is 4 and is in the program, so then even my parents were back over there waving at me, and it was very strange and jarring. And then this is worse. So let's see what happens this morning. Peace here at the end of this Advent series, where we've talked about that. At Advent, we want to go with simple and straightforward and meaningful. That's why the church for years and years and years has focused on hope and love and joy and peace, because our busy hearts are tired, and we are close to the finish line now, and we need simple and true and powerful. And so for centuries, not only have Christians been telling the story of what happens at Bethlehem, centuries before that, telling the stories of what happened in Bethlehem, but also we've been gathering together and talking about hope and joy and love and peace. And so these are timeless truths. But peace, I think of the four, peace in particular, has a way of, the way we think of it is less timeless throughout the centuries, and that's because as human beings have grown and evolved and adapted and come up with particularly new technologies, some of the things that were a great cause of anxiety in the past are like non-issues almost today, specifically because of technology. I really enjoy Dawson, our youth director, is almost 20 years younger than me. And so sometimes in our staff meeting, we'll be talking about things, and I'll kind of look over and I'll be like, oh, he has no idea what that is. Like I was trying to explain, we were, a number of us were joking about when you needed your mom to pick you up after school and you didn't, what's this, right? You called collect. Did you ever do you have a collect call from, hey, pick me up at school, that sort of thing? But if you're like 25, you don't know what that is at all, right? And then I said, well, you go and use the payphone. And he's like, what? So sometimes we recognize there are entire technologies that just go away, payphones, carrier pigeons. Sometimes it's just about the technologies that don't exist anymore. But then sometimes what happens with technology is it's not just about the way we do a thing changes, but an entire human experience can become significantly diminished compared to what it was before. Specifically when we talk about peace. When's the last time you were lost? Now, I bet, you've got some stories, I do too, whether it's, not having GPS or just good old-fashioned human stubbornness that caused us to be lost. But there's an entire thing here that, human beings used to happen to us where, oh, I don't know where I am, and I can't just pull this out and put it in the GPS and then just go somewhere different. The whole experience of being lost and not knowing where you're going, which was kind of a, shared human experience for, I don't know, every human being who's ever lived up until 20 years ago, now has changed and is affected in certain kinds of ways, especially when we read it in the scriptures. I have this memory of being with my grandparents in Memphis, and my grandfather, he would have been in maybe his mid-60s at the time. I would have been 10 or 11, and my grandparents were good grandparents. There were 2 different malls in Memphis that they used to take us to because that's what grandparents do, right? Do you want to go to this one? Do you want to go to both? Okay, let's go to both, that sort of thing. So these two, the Hickory Ridge Mall and the Mall of Memphis, were only like 4 miles apart from each other, but it was downtown and lots of side streets or whatever. And so my grandfather like dropped my grandmother off somewhere, a hair appointment or something like that, and then he and I were driving around, but he relied on her for a lot of the navigation. And I just remember like he got real quiet. And there's no maps, there's no phones, there's no whatever. And he was mid-60s, and I'm 10, I'm worthless, right? And I just remember him driving around and thinking like, we don't know where we are at all. And then I remember he was trying to get to Hickory Ridge Mall, and I remember at one point he came out and looked, but he was at the wrong mall. And I remember him coming out and going, my God, the Mall of Memphis. Like, it was the most terrifying thing that had ever happened to him in his life. And he fought in World War II, and so, like, there's a whole experience there of being lost where the only thing you can do, well, you can do two things. You can ask for directions like a grown-up, or you can do what most of us grown-ups, particularly of the male variety, tend not to do in that situation, which is, I will figure this out, even if it takes hours. But that whole thing has kind of been sliced out of the equation. Something that used to have the ability to rob peace from a person is often missing in the human story. I say all that to say, Bethlehem in this series, we've been tracking where it shows up in the Old Testament before it shows up at Mary and Joseph and baby Jesus. But when that story takes place, again, as we shared last week, there's not this grand kind of thing. The news is really only known by Mary and Joseph and Jesus, and then God announces it to the shepherds. It's very different, certainly, than if something like that were to take place today. And even the wise men don't know exactly where they're going. This is the good preacher joke here, right? Is what do wise men do? Wise men ask for directions. Here's how that story goes. This is Matthew 2. We're going to go back to the Old Testament in a second. But in Matthew 2, in the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to not Bethlehem, but they went to Jerusalem. They went to HQ because they had to ask, where? Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? We observed his star at its rising. We've come to pay him homage. When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. So note, there's a point here in the story that maybe we overlook sometimes or we just forget. Herod doesn't know. Like, again, no ear has heard his coming. That Herod is not aware that Jesus, the Messiah, has been born in Bethlehem. The wise men arrive, but they don't know where they're going either. They arrive in Jerusalem and just start asking questions, which ends up being a very dangerous thing. Herod calls together all the chief priests and the scribes of the people and inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. And the chief priests and the scribes know the answer to this question because they've read the Old Testament. So the chief priests and the scribes know if he's going to be born in Bethlehem of Judea because it has been written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, you are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel. Now, they're reading from the prophet Micah, which we're going to look at in just a second. But these are particular words here at the end. So the wise men see the star, they go, but they don't know exactly where. So they go to Jerusalem, assuming, well, the Messiah of the people has been born. Surely the king will know, but he doesn't know. And he's afraid instantly. And if you know the King Herod story, this is all going to lead to terrible violence. The king asks the scribes. They know because they know Bethlehem. They know the story, and they know the prophet Micah. And so what they tell him is it's in Bethlehem because that's what the prophet Micah said. And there's two words in particular up here. It says, "From you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd." As we've seen throughout this whole series, Bethlehem is a story of two things that at first seem like they don't go together at all. house of meat and the house of bread, these other things. But this too, a ruler and a shepherd that seem like they don't go together. What we'll find in this Jesus is that they actually flow together quite nicely. It's not a ruler who is to rule, but it's not just any old shepherd either, not even a little bit, not at all. This combination of a shepherd and a ruler is this idea of we need the one who has the power to do it, the power to save, the power to lead, but he's going to lead in a certain kind of way. And that way is more gentle, more personal, and much more of a caretaker. So the wise men are lost. They ask for directions, and the prophets, the scribes know the answer because it's in Micah. So here's what's going on back in Micah, one of the last books of the Old Testament. This is the fullness of the passage that they are reading. So, for us, sometimes it can be easy to hear this portion of the story and think, well, God, like, if they knew the answer was Bethlehem all along, why weren't they paying more attention? Why wasn't there someone always there to be like, let's check all the newborn babies in Bethlehem? Does any of them look like the Messiah, right? But Jesus just kind of slips in. Now, some of this is human nature because there are centuries between the prophecy and its fulfilling. But I think part of the reason that they may have missed it is because what's happening in Micah when this prophecy is made is a difficult situation, and one that perhaps they might not have thought would actually come true, or might not have thought it's, one of those things where you look at this and you're like, are you sure it's really going to happen this way? The wise men are lost, and they can only ask for direction. In Micah, the people are not lost, but they're trapped. Lost, maybe we've alleviated through some percentage of the grace of God and human technology. Trapped is something you and I can still feel and experience in all kinds of different ways. Lost is knowing where you want to go, but you don't know how to get there. Trapped is knowing exactly where you are, but you don't know how to get out. So in Micah, the city is surrounded. You're walled around with a wall. Siege is laid against us. This language about they're striking the ruler of Israel upon the cheek, it's this idea that at the time, they're being laid siege by the Assyrians, who are not coming in and just, slaughtering everyone, but they're making a mockery of things, bringing out the king and making him bow down or slapping him in the face or things like that. They are trapped, they are under siege, and the things that they've looked to provide protection, comfort, and all of that are really being made a mockery of. So you can see maybe why they might have looked at this prophecy about Bethlehem and thought, we sure about this? But it continues in verse 2. But you, O Bethlehem of Ephrathah, who are one of the little clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to rule in Israel, whose origin is from of old, from ancient days. Therefore, he shall give them up until the time when she who is in labor has brought forth, and then the rest of his kindred shall return to the people of Israel. And he shall stand and feed his flock. Again, see the combination of shepherd and rule. He shall stand and feed his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they shall live secure, for now he shall be great to the ends of the earth. And he shall be the one of peace. Then it goes on to deal more specifically with what they were facing in that particular time and place with the Assyrians. But looking back on this passage, it sounds like it makes perfect sense to us here today, but in the first century with the Roman Empire, where they're facing a different kind of trapped, or maybe they even still feel a different kind of lost. This promise comes forth in such a way that when the wise men come and say, "We've seen the star," and they go to Herod, and Herod goes to the people, the scribes look and say, "If it's going to come anywhere, this is really true. We trust that it's going to come from Bethlehem." And both in Micah and in the way it's quoted by Matthew in the New Testament is this idea that this Messiah will both rule and shepherd. That this Messiah will have all of the power and all of the ability and all of the things that we need from a ruler. But this Jesus comes not to rule, not to dominate, not to fight violence with violence. This Jesus comes to shepherd his people. We would say that's something this Jesus is still doing today. Help encourage the flock, you and me, to listen for his voice, to help be a certain kind of person here in this world that might continue this way of leading by shepherding. But none of that means that we can't still be in situations where we might feel trapped. And theologically, you can see them continuing to struggle with this throughout Micah. That the things they've put their trust in, their hope in, the king, these things are falling away. These things are laid bare. These things are showing that they were things they never should have put all of their trust in the first place, going all the way back to God saying, "Are you sure you really want a king?" All these things that they put their hope and their trust in being laid bare, and now they're walled in with a wall, and they feel like they can't get out. And as we've seen throughout this series, there are some very famous Bible passages, very famous Bible verses that we know well that get attached to the story of Bethlehem. But like it's always important to do, we want to put those things in their context. I want to show you one more this morning, which is kind of how this prophecy in Micah ends. But note the difficulty of the language that comes before. This is the next chapter. This is Micah 6. God is speaking to the people who know that they're trapped and are struggling and are laid siege, and the things they've put their trust in are falling away. And for these people in Micah 6, there is this sense of like, what do we do? The things we put our trust in are failing, which ultimately leads them to ask this question that I think most human beings at some point come to ask, especially when we feel trapped, especially when we're under siege, which is this somehow my fault? No, I'm not the king, and I'm not in charge of any of this other stuff, but are we being judged? Am I being judged? Is this somehow my fault? And if so, what do I do? And God says to these people, like, with what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself? Should you come with burnt offering with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams or 10,000 rivers of oil? Or shall I even give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? God says, no. He's told you, O mortal, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? Do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. Can we leave that up there for a minute? So the people who feel trapped are asking themselves, like, what do we do? Is this somehow my fault? Am I being judged? What do I do? Is it offering? Is it giving more? Is it 10,000 rivers of oil? Or even leading to the harshest question of all, which we think the Bible asks because other ancient religions were doing it, of, should I sacrifice my child to somehow earn favor with this God? The fruit of my body for the sin of my soul. And God says to all of that, no. And here's the thing about peace. This part, Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. This is also not the thing we do to get peace. This is the life we live because we already have it. The peace that we need, the peace that is coming, comes this way. And thanks be to God for a ruler who not only shepherds us, but gives himself for what we cannot do. This is not the way to earn anything. This is what we do when we live well from the place of believing that we already had it. If you feel lost, if you feel trapped, if you feel like you are not good enough, if you feel like this is all somehow your fault, all of these things, peace comes not through us doing more of anything. The peace, the peace we're after, it comes right through there, right through the cross. Peace we need for reconciliation, the peace that enables us to live this kind of life. And so God says, look, it's not about the 10,000 rivers of oil or sacrifice or anything like that. This is why Jesus later will go on and say, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. And so because we have it, because of the voice of the shepherd, we're invited, to do justice and to love it, not just to like kindness, but to be like, I guess. But to love kindness and to walk humbly with God. Eugene Peterson, who does The Message, translates this last part as, stop taking yourself so seriously, but take God very seriously. Do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. There are so many ways, and it happens to me still too, where when I feel lost or trapped, that I can look inward, I can start thinking, is this my fault? Is there more I should have done? If I did X, then would God do Y, and all of that? And it's so easy to forget. When it comes to God and when it comes to peace, we've been given everything we need by one who is a ruler, but is also a shepherd. And his invitation to us, the voice of the shepherd to the sheep, is not to earn anything, but because we have it. Do justice and love kindness and walk humbly with God. I can't promise you, no matter how technology changes or anything changes, that we're not still going to have moments when we feel lost or trapped. When we do, and when we panic and our palms get sweaty and we start gripping it tight and our mind runs all kinds of ways, and I don't know about you, but I don't do my very best thinking when I'm stressed. That's when we need the simple and the straightforward most. Maybe then, maybe now is the best time for us to remember that the peace that we're after, the peace that we're about, is done for us through Christ on the cross and an empty tomb. And our call is to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with our God, not to earn anything, but because he has been given to us, God with us, a ruler and a shepherd. We pray with me.